Hello and welcome back. In the previous part, we put all the items inside the header part in one block. But we want to have all the menu items inside this part in one block as well instead of different lines. Inside the developer tool, if you click on the nav part that contains your menu, you have this block highlighted. If you click on the UL, is the items of your menu, you have this part. And you will see some orange part and green part here. These are the spaces for this element that will be applied by default. To have a better look, first I need to remove the extra spaces that I have for this UL element. If you scroll down to the style part, you will see a box here. This is the box model of every HTML element inside your HTML document. If you click on each element, you will see this box as well. And you can change some properties for these box, for these elements using this box as well. When you move your mouse over one element inside this developer tool, you will see some part in the left pane is highlighted with different colors. For the nav element, I have just the blue part. It means I don't have the other properties. But for the UL element here, I have the green, orange, and the blue part. And what are these? You will see here. The blue part is actually the content of your HTML element. The green part is padding. Padding is defined as internal space. It means the distance of the elements from the outer of the element, from the borders of the element. The yellow part is border. We don't have border here, but the orange part is margin. Margin means external space, the distance between this element and the other elements. And when you see the orange part is highlighted only for top and the bottom of this element, it means that the margin has only for these two sides of these elements. If the right part and the left part of these elements also have margin, you will see that this part is also highlighted. First, I want to remove all the unnecessary spaces for this UL element. So I have to define a rule for this UL element. Again, I can define the rule for this UL element in different ways. Be careful. When you want to define a rule, you should be sure that you don't want to have or you want to have that rule for other elements of that type as well or not. The thing that I need here is only for the UL element that is inside the nav element. So if I want to define a rule for here, I can define it in different ways. So here in my HTML document, I can define a class name for here or an ID for this UL, but I want to use a different way. I want to use another kind of selectors that I can have inside my CSS rules, and it is really useful. You may want for the other rules that you want to define in your CSS file. This UL element is inside the nav, and in CSS file, if I want to define a rule for these things, a child of a parent, I can say nav, the parent name, and with one blank space, the child name. It means the UL element that is inside the nav element, and it means not all the UL elements. This rule will be applied only for a UL element that is inside the nav element. Inside curly braces, just I define the selector here. And when you move your mouse over this, you will see a sample of this rule that will be selected. And when you move your mouse over this selector, you will see that how the elements selected using this rule. You have a warning here because you have a wavy line under this selector, and this is because you didn't define any property for this rule, any value for this rule, and this is an empty rule. You should avoid to have empty rules inside your CSS. But I want to define something. The first thing that I want to remove from this UL element is to remove the internal space. And the internal space will be defined using padding property. Padding, and you can define value for this just with one value. It means all the padding. Padding can be defined for different sides, for top, right, bottom, and left of the item. You can use the padding property with one value or two values or three values or four values. If you use one value, it means for all the sides, the padding should be 0, and the 0 means nothing. By default, the UL element has some padding. Let's see. Now, if you move your mouse over this UL element, you won't see the green part on the left pane anymore because I removed the padding. And if you move your mouse up here, you see the padding is 0. Uncheck, you have padding. Check, you don't have padding. And if you open this arrow here, you will see the value for different padding of this item. Let me move up. Padding top, padding right, padding bottom, and padding left. You can set the value for different sides separately. Instead of one padding, you can use padding top. You can use padding right, as you see here. But I want to just remove all the paddings from this element. And also I want to remove the external space. To remove the external space, you have to use margin property. So here, after the padding 0, I will define margin. Margin is the distance between this element and the other elements around. And when you set as 0, it means you don't have or you don't need any space between this element and the other elements. Like padding, margin can have one value, two values, three values, four values. And the value that you can set for padding and margin should be length. If you want to set it as 0, you don't have the length unit. But if you want to have a number, for example, 12, you have to set the unit for this number as well. For example, pixel, for example, point. These are different units that you can use for these properties. But for now, I want to just remove the margin from here. And if I save in the browser, if I click on this UL element or move my mouse over this element, you will see that I don't have the orange part highlighted in the left pane as well. The orange part is margin. I don't have the orange part. I just have the blue part here. No padding, no border, and no margin. And like padding, you can define margin for different sides separately. But because I set one value here, it means for all the sides should be the same as each other. If you define two values, means top and bottom, right and left. For example, if I say here 10 pixel and 15 pixel, to edit here, just click and you can edit them. And open this again, you see that margin top and bottom are 10 pixel and margin right and left are 15 pixel. If you add another number, it means different. But for now, I just need 0 to remove all the margins, and that's all. If you want to know more about padding and margin, please watch my other videos about HTML and CSS. I discussed in detail about these properties in those courses. Anyway, as you see, I have a black tiny circles next to each item inside the navigation list. But in my template, I don't have such thing. I can remove these black circles using one property in CSS for UL element. By default, when you define a UL element inside your HTML document, you will see this black circle here next to each item, and all the items are on top of each other. This black circle is called disk, and you can also change this to another shape, for example square, for example circle, and also you can remove this circle or black circle from here too. By default, when you define a UL element, for each item that is defined under this UL element using LI element, you have a black circle next to each item that is called disk. This is UL element, unordered list. If you use OL instead of the black circles or disk here, you will see numbers. For example, if I want to change the UL element to OL element or ordered list, I click on the UL element, press F2, and I type OL here and press enter to change or rename my element. You can do this for all the other elements as well. And if I save, you will see that I have numbers here. And the rule that I defined for UL inside the nav element will not be applied for this part. Why? Because this is not UL, this is OL, and the rule that I define is for UL element. Anyway, let me change this OL back to UL using Ctrl Z and save. And inside this CSS file, I want to remove that black circle or disk from my UL items. UL element and OL element have a property as the name list style type. Using list style type, you can define the type of the circles or the type of the icons that should be shown next to each item for this UL. And using this property, I can change this or I can remove this. You see some values are only applied for OL elements and some values are applied only for UL elements. For example, circle will be shown as an empty circle. Disk is the default that you will see a black circle next to each item for a UL element. But if I want to remove this icon next to each item for a list, I should use the value as none. Save, and you see I don't have that black circle next to each item here anymore. And let me just remove the background color for this home link and this login link that I defined in my HTML document. Here in this HTML document, I removed the class attribute for this home and the class name for this login. And okay, now better. For now, it's better. Now I want to put all these LI elements, for all these LI elements next to each other. By default, the value for display property of LI element is list item, and list item is kind of a block level element. They have the whole block of their parent. The parent of this UL element is the nav element, and the nav element has only the 50% of the browser window width. So they have the whole width of their parent. If I want to put these items next to each other, I should use the display property for each of them. But how? Inside my CSS file, I want to define a rule for every li element that is inside the ul element, and that ul element inside that ul element is inside the nav element. To define this rule, I should use a selector like this: the nav element, the parent of the parent, or the grandparent, and then ul element, the parent, and then li element. It means every li element that is inside the ul, and this ul is inside the nav element. And when you move your mouse over this selector, you will see something like this: li under ul under nav. And inside this, I will define a display property with a value. Instead of block or list item, I will use inline, and that's all. Inline means occupy the width as its content needs. If I save this and see the browser, now you will see that all the items are next to each other. We can also use inline block as the value for these items as well. Here, instead of inline, press Ctrl space to open this hint for yourself, or we call it as IntelliSense as well, and you can choose inline block and save. You see they are still next to each other, and also we need some space between them. You see, in our template they are not sticking together, they have some spaces between them. We have some space between these items. To add a space between these items, we can use padding property, or we can use margin property. I will use padding property. I don't want to add padding for top and bottom, but I want to add padding for left and right. How? Inside here, for nav ulli selector, I define padding. You can define using, I want to define padding. You can use the padding property, that is shorthand property, to set value for the thickness of the padding area. You see, the padding area is the internal distance between the content and the border. And you can also use padding left or padding right to set the value for the padding of the right and left of one item, one element. So you can use the shorthand or for each side separately. I want to use the shorthand. I don't want to set the value for top and bottom. I want to consider them as 0. So I say 0 for the first value. Then I will add, for example, 15 pixels for the left and right. This means padding for top and bottom should be 0, and for the right and left should be 15 pixels. Now if I save and see this, you will see that I have some spaces between these menu items. Now for the login part, I want to put the login and register on top of each other instead of showing them next to each other. You see, for now I have them next to each other. If I want to have them in different lines or in different blocks, I should use display property for these two elements as well. How can I do this? Of course, using defining a rule for this part. If you take a look at this part, you will see that in the div with the class login, you have two A elements, one for login and one for register. To define a rule to separate these two elements into two different blocks, I can define my rule like this. After the login part, After the login part here, I press and enter. I define a rule using this kind of selector now. Dot login. It means for every element with a class login, consider the A element. Every A element inside any element with a class name login, do this. Do what? Set the display property as block. Now if I save, you will see that login and register now are on top of each other. So far it's good, but the login and register looks different. Let's take a look at our template. You see, I have border around the login and the register button and the color for the background of the register and login is different. If you want to know how I fix this problem, join me in the next video.